I stood frozen behind the door, champagne trembling in my hand, as my future father-in-law declared, "She saw dollar signs the moment she met Jake. That girl is just a small-town opportunist." 18 months of polite smiles bending over backward, and this was what they really thought of me. What I did next changed everything. I met Jake Thompson 18 months ago at a Denver coffee shop. I was freelancing graphic design, barely making rent in my studio apartment. My parents back in rural Wyoming, dad at the mine, mom cleaning houses, had sacrificed everything for my community college education. Jake was different. An architect with kind eyes and a beat-up Honda. Our first date was splitting tacos from a food truck. For months we explored hiking trails and art galleries. When my biggest client bailed, leaving me short on rent, he quietly covered it without making me feel like charity. 6 months in, he casually mentioned his family's business. "Thompson Construction's been around 30 years, he said. "Dad built it from nothing. I figured it was your typical family construction company. Successful, but nothing fancy." I was wrong. Sunday dinner was my first clue. We drove through increasingly upscale neighborhoods until we reached a gated community. The Thompson estate sprawled across 5 acres, a stunning contemporary fortress overlooking the Rockies. Richard Thompson commanded every room he entered, tall, silver-haired, with calculating eyes. Helen Thompson was polished perfection in designer clothes and practiced smiles. During dinner, they studied me like I was a business proposition. Richard asked pointed questions about my background. When I mentioned Wyoming and my parents' blue-collar jobs, something shifted in his expression. Thompson Construction wasn't just successful, it dominated Colorado's commercial building scene. Half of Denver's skyline bore their signature. I left feeling inadequate. Jake apologized for their formality. "They'll warm up once they know you better." They never did. I tried everything. Conservative clothes, researching their interests, volunteering for family events. When Helen needed marketing materials for her charity auction, I spent weeks creating elegant designs for free. She accepted them with polite indifference. Later, I overheard her telling a friend she'd had to make do with amateur work. Richard's disapproval was surgical. Pointed questions about my income and financial planning, delivered with the tone of someone who already knew I was lacking. Comments about my car, my clothes, my choice of restaurants. Nothing direct, but the message was clear: I wasn't good enough. During a family barbecue, I heard Richard tell his business partner that Jake was going through a phase. I started declining family events. Helen began wondering aloud if I was too busy for family. Everything exploded at Jake's birthday dinner at Denver's most exclusive restaurant. I'd blown a week's income on a new dress, hoping to finally meet their standards. When conversation turned to Jake's future, Richard made it clear he expected his son to settle down appropriately. Helen added that she looked forward to planning a wedding that would reflect the family's standing. The subtext was unmistakable: I wasn't that person. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, I called my financial advisor. "I need a comprehensive financial statement, everything. Make it look official." The truth about my money was something I'd never told anyone in Denver. My parents, despite their modest jobs, were incredibly smart with money. Dad had invested every spare dollar in mining company stock options over 20 years. Mom's cleaning business had grown into a successful service employing 12 people. But the real game changer was my grandfather. He'd been an early investor in a tech startup that became a cloud computing giant. When he passed during my freshman year, he left me a trust fund that matured on my 25th birthday, 6 months before I met Jake. My modest lifestyle wasn't from necessity, it was choice. I'd seen how wealth corrupted relationships and wanted something real with someone who loved me for me. The irony was perfect. While Richard suspected me of being a gold digger, my net worth exceeded his by millions. The trust fund plus investments had grown to over $15 million. Jake called that afternoon voice tight. My parents want dinner this weekend. Dad says we need to discuss our future. I recognized the tone. This would be a confrontation. Perfect, I replied. I think it's time for complete honesty. Saturday evening, Richard waited in his study floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, expensive art intimidation by design. He positioned Jake and me in chairs like defendants facing judgment. I've asked you both here because things need to be said. Richard began. Jake, someday you'll inherit Thompson Construction. The choices you make, especially regarding marriage, affect more than just you. His gaze shifted to me, cold and assessing. Sarah, let's be honest about what this relationship represents. You come from a very different world. Helen entered quietly, expression sympathetic but resigned. I've researched your background. Richard continued. Blue-collar parents. No degree. No assets. No family connections that benefit our business. Your freelance income is inconsistent. You live in a studio apartment, drive an old car, have no meaningful savings. Each statement hit like a calculated blow. Furthermore, he said, I believe you've recognized an opportunity to improve your circumstances by attaching yourself to our family. After 18 months of hints, Richard was finally saying it. I was a gold digger. That's not true, I said quietly. I love Jake for who he is. Richard's smile was patronizing. Let's examine facts. You met Jake when clearly struggling financially. Within weeks, he was paying for dinners, helping with rent. You moved in together, eliminating housing costs while Jake covered expenses. Jake was growing angry. You're completely wrong about our relationship. When one partner consistently contributes more, Richard corrected, it creates imbalance that breeds resentment. Helen stepped forward. We're preventing hurt for everyone. These relationships rarely work because inequality creates problems love can't solve. I felt fury and resolve forming in my chest. You're right about one thing, I said, voice steadier than I felt. There is fundamental inequality in this room, but it's not what you think. I pulled out the envelope my advisor had prepared, setting it on the coffee table. Since you've investigated my finances, I thought you might want the complete picture. Jake looked confused. He had no idea what was coming. What is this? Richard asked, humoring me. Bank statements, investment portfolios, property holdings, complete financial disclosure from my wealth management advisor. The room went silent. Helen's face shifted to uncertainty. Jake stared at me with bewilderment. Wealth management advisor, Helen whispered. Premier Financial Services. Managing my portfolio since I inherited my grandfather's estate. Richard reached for the envelope with trembling hands. Whatever modest inheritance, $15.3 million. I said quietly, as of last Friday's close. Helen staggered into a chair. Jake's mouth fell open. Richard's hands shook as he examined documents, bank statements, showing balances that dwarfed his net worth, diversified portfolios, property holdings, including a Colorado mountain home I'd never mentioned. This can't be accurate, he said, voice lacking authority. The trust was established when I was born. My grandfather invested early in cloud tech systems. When they went public, his stake became worth $50 million. Helen had collapsed completely. But your tiny apartment, your old car, because I wasn't raised to believe wealth defines worth. My parents taught me character matters more than bank accounts. Jake found his voice. Sarah, why didn't you tell me? because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what I have. I've seen what money does to relationships. What we had was real." Richard stared at the documents. "But why live so modestly?" "Because work fulfills me. Because I've seen what happens to people who live off inherited wealth without purpose." I stood up, feeling stronger than I had in years. "You've spent 18 months treating me like a gold-digging opportunist. You made assumptions about my character based entirely on your perception of my economic status." Helen was crying. "We had no idea. You could have taken time to actually know me. You could have looked beyond appearances to see who I really am." Richard set the documents down with shaking hands. "This changes everything." "Does it?" I asked. "Because I'm exactly the same person I was 10 minutes ago. The only thing that's changed is your knowledge of my bank balance. If that changes how you see me, what does that say about your values?" The weeks following were strange. Jake and I processed everything in careful silence. "We need to talk," I finally said. "I can see you're struggling with this. I keep trying to reconcile the woman I fell in love with who worried about rent with someone who has more money than my entire family combined. I'm the same person, Jake. Money doesn't change who I am. But it changes everything else. Every time I paid for dinner, helped with bills, you were playing a role." "I wasn't playing a role. I was being myself. The woman who fell in love with you, that's completely real. But you let me believe we were in different financial positions. I was going to tell you. I was waiting for the right moment. When exactly how long were you planning to maintain this?" We talked through the night. By morning, we'd reached understanding. My wealth would require navigation, but it didn't have to destroy what we'd built. 6 months later, Jake and I stood in a community center we'd helped fund. Families toured affordable housing units designed with Jake's architectural vision. A young mother named Maria walked through with her children, eyes bright with hope. My kids could each have their own room. This project had become more than using wealth purposefully. It had become the foundation for partnership neither of us could have imagined. Richard and Helen arrived dressed impeccably, and clearly uncomfortable with the diverse crowd. Maria approached us holding keys to her new apartment. "I wanted to thank whoever made this possible. My family's been on waiting lists for 3 years. Jake stepped forward with genuine warmth. "How do the spaces feel?" "Like a miracle. My son will have his own space for homework for the first time." Helen's response was polite but distant. Richard nodded with detached benevolence. The contrast between Jake's genuine engagement and his parents' performative charity was stark. After Maria left, Jake turned to his parents with new clarity. "Did you understand what she said about homework space? What that means for a family in overcrowded conditions?" Helen looked confused. "Of course. It's wonderful these families are getting help. We're here because we care about basic human dignity," Jake replied firmly. "We're here supporting your project," Richard said defensively. "You're here because it reflects well on the family. But you're not here because you actually care about Maria as an individual worthy of respect." After heated exchanges, Jake made his decision. "I love you both, but I can't pretend I don't see how you treat people you consider beneath your status. Sarah and I will limit family events where we're expected to watch you treat people with condescension." The ultimatum hung in the air. A year later, Jake proposed at our second housing development, surrounded by tangible evidence of what we could accomplish together. Our wedding was small and intimate at a Colorado vineyard. Maria and her children attended along with other families from our programs. Their presence a reminder that meaningful relationships transcend social boundaries. As we exchanged vows in golden mountain light, I felt grateful for the journey that brought us here. The revelation of my wealth, initially destructive, had forced us to examine what we truly valued. We'd learned that genuine partnership isn't about financial compatibility. It's about shared values, mutual respect, and willingness to grow together. Most importantly, we'd found purpose in using our privileges to create opportunities for others. As we danced our first dance surrounded by our chosen community, I knew we'd built something real, defined not by bank accounts, but by commitment to treating every person with dignity.